What we're doing is a program called obviously How to Make Sense of and Navigate Your Team, including your boss. My name is Ann Collier. I know many of you, obviously. And I have been working to improve culture, collaboration, and communication through excellence in leadership and some custom tools for over 20 years. And before that, I was a tax lawyer. Okay, so for those of you who haven't been on a program with us before, we do this meeting style so that people can you can ask questions. I mean, we've done. I mean, this might be my I don't know. I would say 10,000th workshop, but I don't think it's quite like that. But the point really is we're here for you. So ask your questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking a question, but you want it asked, then just private text or message Cynthia, and she will ask the question. So I know that several of you have seen these slides before, but my own experience is that the more that I learned something last week on a KAI call that I thought was pretty interesting, even though I've been a master practitioner and doing work with KAI for over a decade. So what we want to focus on is like when you have differences in style, and I know I have an agenda here. When you have differences in style, what do you do about it, and how do you recognize it? And oh, my slides aren't advancing. There we go. Okay, how do you recognize it? What does it mean for communication, trust, implementation of ideas? And then if we have time, I'm going to talk a little bit about using coaching skills, which is sort of the magical tool for solving just about any problem. So my hope is you're going to be able to recognize differences in problem solving style as a result of kind of revisiting this or better recognize it, that you're going to harness the different brainstorming styles. I know that some of you are managers of people, some of you aren't, but I know that all of you have to work with people. So you want to make sure that you're recognize, like if things are going well, maybe you don't need this, but when there's a little bit of a challenge, you probably, you do need some way of a structure for looking at the personal interaction to be able to approach it and make some changes. And then, like I said, coaching is just a tool to be used using 360 degrees. And I would also say with like your teenagers, your toddlers, spouses, everything, everybody in your life. Also, we have focused quite a bit on critical thinking skills. So I just want to throw this out there that, when we hear a lot of complaints that people are not engaging, using critical thinking skills. So remember that critical thinking is about intentionally setting, systematic standards for assessing, adjusting, adapting, and improving a situation. And then when we talk about how do you scrutinize your own biases, assumptions, and perspective, what we're really doing here is giving you insight into how you think about solving problems so that you can make changes when it's necessary. So you may be someone like me who's very flexible in their approach, and maybe a more structured approach would be more valuable, or you may be incredibly structured and recognize that in certain situations you need to add flexibility in. That's just an example, and it's more than that, but just to sort of plant that seed. So when we talk about teamwork, we're talking about, how does your team fit together, notwithstanding that there are differences. If you've got our workbook, you'll see that we've got the Arudia collaborative approach in the orange section of the workbook. And what this is about is how do you create effective teamwork? Go from being a group to a team, and you can see that there's 5 steps, and those steps are shaped in a wheel. And that's because it's not just that you kind of build trust and then, okay, check that box, I've done it, or harness diversity, or achieve commitment. It is ongoing and it is daily. So we're going to focus on harnessing diversity and what it means. So I know many of you have seen this like goofy picture of me with my family. And the point here is that we all try to, fit in and fit in with a group. And we notice when we don't fit in. I was probably about, I don't know, 7 or 8 when I first noticed that I was different than my whole family. And it wasn't until I was Myers-Briggs certified that I realized that I was the only extrovert in a family of introverts. Well, my first career was as a tax lawyer, and I started at the Internal Revenue Service, where, as you can imagine, I didn't quite fit in. And so the reason I didn't fit in, it didn't have anything to do with my, being a redhead in a pretty conservative environment. It was more about the different thinking styles. So remembering that when we think differently, we look at situations differently, our communication can sort of not align. And, it feels a little bit like you're speaking a different language to someone and they're just not understanding you. Or having just come back from a trip overseas, there were times where like, all right, my French is working and now it's not. I don't know enough. So just a complete lack of communication. And what we're really talking about here is the difference between problem A, which is the task at hand, and problem B. Problem A, again, is that task that you're trying to work on, is the problem you're trying to solve. It's why you go to work every day. Problem B is the friction that can arise between colleagues of different problem-solving styles. And it sounds a little bit like this. It sounds like Mark, or it sounds like Amanda, who's frustrated with Mark because he's not detailed enough. Or Ian, who's also frustrated with Mark because he's so in the weeds, he's not seeing the big picture. And so the point is that Amanda and Ian look at Mark differently. Just like if you look at this picture, you're seeing, what do you see here? And you can put it in the chat if you'd like. Or shout it out, either way. What do you see? All right, the bunny. Thanks, Liz. So the point is that we can be looking at the exact, and this, as corny as this may be, you're either seeing a rabbit or a duck, or you're seeing both, depending on which end you look at, right? And so the point here is that we can, Cynthia and I, who've been working together for a long time, can look at a situation and see it very differently. So the point is that if you think about whether it's your type, your problem-solving style, your leadership style, it's like your hardwiring colors how you see things. So if you've got blue glasses on, you're looking at this slide and maybe you see the 7, the 10, the 1, and the 5, which add up to be 23, or you see more numbers, which I think that adds up to be 28, or you see even more. But the point here really is to recognize that how you see things affects what you focus on and the conclusions that you draw. And so I'm always hoping, and this is especially whether you're managing up to your boss or with your staff or just working with colleagues, is to recognize that that person has made assumptions that are colored by that red or blue lens about what's important and what can be changed or not changed. So just to recognize that your colleagues have different approaches to problems. So, and this is different ways of thinking. So we would, if we're doing this workshop style, we would be, asking you, what does problem solving look like when it's working well, and what annoys you when it's not working well? And this is a really great way to tease out how much process someone likes, how they like to collaborate. So in looking at the model that we're using, which is the Kirton Adaption-Innovation Inventory, we're looking at the difference between people who are more adaptive and really like to solve problems methodically. They want to plan, they want to have a pretty detailed plan and not leave much up to chance or not leave much up to emergent planning. Versus at the other end, the innovative end is really about doing things differently. So changing the structure. So if you're in an organization um, where you're reshaping the leadership structure, for example, or you're creating a new department, that's a change in structure, which is then going to have obviously ripple effects. That's more like an innovative change. So when we look at the definitions, what you've got here is to remember that style is how a person solves problems. So you all have different problem solving styles, kind of like you see things differently, like whether you see the duck or the bunny or which numbers you see. More structured means, or more adaptive means that you prefer to solve problems associated with a more consensually agreed upon structure. Innovative means that you want less structure or prefer fewer constraints and are less concerned that the structure be consensually agreed. Everybody's creative. So, I can't emphasize enough that even if you're not innovative, you are creative. Everybody's creative, regardless of where they are on the continuum. And then, a new idea is just something that's new and original. So when we talk about creativity, we're not talking about level. We're actually talking about how you are creative. So along that continuum. And problem solving style isn't related to, as I just said, intelligence, seniority or experience, where you come from, your skills or your qualifications, or your motivation. So I'm curious. I'm curious about. So I want to just use this as an example. Um, this is a team that we worked with years ago, and it's a leadership team. Matt is the CEO, and then Mary and Carrie are directors. Names changed, um, but and then you can see most people are in the middle. So this probably makes sense. Like most people are not super duper structured or super unstructured, but kind of like need some structure, but also need some flexibility. The key here is that at 10 points difference, what you're seeing is that you're noticing that the difference problem solving styles, that there's a difference, right? And I'm wondering if anybody has an example that they're willing to share with the group where they notice whether it's their boss, a colleague, or or somebody that reports to them, or somebody that they even have dotted line reporting is either pretty similar and hey, that works really well, but sometimes we might miss things, or really different and sometimes there's a little bit of friction, but in the end it works out. Does anybody have any examples?
I have that with my just base core of educators that I have underneath me. It's me as the manager, and then I have two educators that are full time, and one is definitely more innovated, on the innovated side. And I'm like at like 112, I think, if I remember right. Um, and then the other is the more adaptive. And while we even each other out in the end, it is there are times that it is um that there's lively discussion, I think.
Yeah.
But um
Where when there's friction, what does the friction tend to be about?
I think about the task management part of it. Um Myself and the one who is even more probably innovated score than me, we do a lot of the talking and coming up with ideas, and then um the other is Um, he wants to the clear cut of this is okay, you guys are coming up with this. Are you finishing this? Or are you,
Mhm.
is this me or this isn't what we talked about before and this has been a complete change. And so now, so that's kind of when we have more of the friction on that, but it's
Yeah,
been a lot of communication.
Yeah, so the more structured, so what Liz is saying is the more structured, and let's just pretend that the other one that's more adaptive is like a 78. They want to know, like, all right, this is what you said I was supposed to do. So I'm doing it, but wait, are you now saying it's different? Does that sound about right, Liz?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And then what about the person who's more innovative? I mean, the more innovative tend to be a little bit more like, yeah, I'll figure it out when I get there.
Yes, that is definitely that's definitely the case. And for me, even I find myself with him, it's we've talked about this. I've given or I've we've said, yep, just take it and run with it. You have a great idea, take it and run with it. It needs to be by, I want to see updates um, by, this date, this time. And for a while, I was spacing that out too far, I think, for him.
Mhm.
And so then when we would have the, just, oh yeah, I forgot, I need to keep working on that, or I'm not quite there yet. And so we figured out a better structure and given him more dates for updates, not for the finished part, but just I need to know where you're at on this by,
Yeah,
you know,
more check-ins, more
yeah,
check-ins. Yeah, I would say that the more innovative have a hard time keeping on track or maybe even noticing that there is a track to keep on. Does that sound about right, Liz?
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, so what advice do you have for everybody else on this call who manages someone who's more innovative and more adaptive? Like, what have you learned? You've been working with this now for um like what, about a year and a half now? Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Yeah, a year and a half now. Um, I think with those who are on the more innovative side, it is like what I said, the not the dates for completion, like that's always going to be the end date, but getting those dates of updates and needing like, hey, we're going to talk about this on this day, um, that keeps them on track while still allowing for them to have the autonomy, which I think once you take that away from them, it you lose them completely, I feel like.
yeah, that's
Um, the one that is more adaptive, we've just made sure that everything is written communication. So anything that we've talked about, we end up emailing to, amongst ourselves too. So that way, any changes or any questions um, that have come up, then he has that and can refer to that. And we also integrated more times for like a sit rep meeting of this is where we're at, what changes, what support, what are you struggling with kind of thing.
hmm.
So that seems to have been it seems to have evened out or lessened the amount of time of frustration on both ends, and then
Yeah,
ultimately on me too. But
yeah,
um,
for sure. Because
yeah,
you get it every which way.
yeah.
I'm curious if you've noticed anything about like working with your boss, like about your boss being the same or different.
Um, I I think for me, it's just been asking him directly of this is the support that I need, or like stating that more. Um, he's he's very good at coming up with the ideas, but isn't necessarily it doesn't always necessarily like fit with what we're trying to do. So I think for me, it's just changed to I need to be more specific for what we're struggling with and what we need from him. Because
Yeah,
otherwise it'll take him like if we come to him with the problem that we're facing, it'll get snowballed into this other huge thing that becomes bigger than what we were trying to fix.
is
So,
is he more innovative than you are?
um, I honestly, I'm not sure. Like,
You might be pretty similar because even you are pretty are on the kind of on are more innovative. So here's let me maybe uh, share a little bit about when you're like the going to your boss, because we promised we talk a little bit about managing up to, and Liz, see if this, tell me if you think this is right or anybody else, right? Is that um, when you have someone that's more innovative, and it doesn't just mean like you can see like 95 is the middle. It doesn't just mean like if you're 96, but kind of in the 105 and above. And again, that's not hard and fast. Sometimes if you're not specific enough about what you need, you don't get it because there's a bit of an assumption of like, well, you're going to tell me what you need, right? Like,
Yep.
just tell me. And then also in that, let me just, the more innovative you are, the less sensitive to hierarchy you are. So for example, someone who's like Carrie, who's a 61, so I've had clients who are a lot more adaptive, who basically won't say like, oh, I don't want to say that to my boss. That seems not right. Whereas someone who's more innovative and the more adaptive boss will be more sensitive to hierarchy as well. But if everybody, but if you're more innovative, the more innovative boss won't be as likely to think questions are impertinent, or and won't be so sensitive to like, well, that was inappropriate. This person is 2 levels down, that kind of thing. It'll just be like, oh yeah, just tell me what you need, like much more like of a casual feel. So I'm kind of curious if, and this is for everybody, does that make sense? Does that feel right? Like think about your colleagues as being more adaptive or more innovative than you are, and maybe even your boss. So let me jump to then why that is. I'm actually mixing things up a little bit today, just sort of for fun. And that is because, all right, so again, let me just go through this um and Troy, I know you have a new boss because your boss retired. So hopefully you're thinking about, I think it's a woman, her in terms of KAI. Um, but here's the thing is again, like, well, send her to me, Troy. You know, the more structured you are, the more you need to have things written out. You need to know exactly what it is, right? And so I'm saying this like you, if you're more structured, your boss or the people who report to you or your colleagues, the more innovative, the more you're willing to go with the flow. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best, right? Because we often have to do what's called coping, and coping is essentially using those skills or those ways of being that require us to do, like being, if I am innovative, being much more detail oriented, working with a spreadsheet, working with numbers, that kind of thing. So that takes a lot of energy. So if we're going to have a conversation about resilience, which we don't really have time for, but just know that the more time you spend doing work that's really different than kind of your sweet spot, the harder it is on you. So you just have to plan. It's not like you can't do that. I would say that most of my work is there's a lot of coping that's going on, but you have to set yourself up for success. And so there can be a gap. So again, remember I said at that 10 points difference, you notice that people are in fact different from you. So there can be a gap between you and a task. We just talked about a gap between, you and a person. But there can also be a gap between a person and a group of people, and then also between teams. And what that means, it really is that even with if the mean of a team, two teams are 5 points or more different, then you can have some friction about how they do things differently. So I think of like, marketing and accounting are sort of the classic. Um, Cynthia, I'm going to play this cartoon, but tell me if you can't hear it. I forgot to do a sound check, okay? And if it doesn't work, I'll just move on.
Flat pack furniture, a new measure of personality. What's your problem-solving style? Meet Claire. Claire received her flat pack table and chairs yesterday, and she is so excited. So Claire has set aside this afternoon to put it together. She's got herself ready in practical clothing and finds her toolkit. First, Claire locates the instructions and reads them all through carefully, noting what order things are going to be done in and what equipment she needs. Next, she opens the box and puts the parts in the order she will need them, keeping the instructions to hand for regular reference. Claire makes each of the chairs first, ensuring they are stable, well secured, and all the parts have been used. Now she moves on to the table. Everything is going to plan. Claire is very happy and is seeing while she works. 1 hour later, she's able to have a lovely cup of tea sitting at her new table and chairs. Claire is very pleased with her afternoon's work. Claire has a more adaptive problem-solving style. She likes things organised and tidy, and she prefers to work in a structured, efficient and methodical way. She is great at getting things done quickly, accurately, and with the minimum of fuss. Now, let's meet Claire's friend, Tallulah. Tallulah has just come back from a cocktail party. It's been great fun, and the drinks were interesting and rather tasty. She sees her flat pack furniture has arrived during the day. How exciting! She just can't wait. Tallulah grabs a glass of red wine, kicks off her shoes, and opens the box. She's going to make her table and chairs right now. Tallulah has made a bit of a mess, but that won't matter. Tallulah's view on flat pack furniture is that it should be obvious how to put it together, so she isn't too worried when she can't find the instructions immediately. Let's get going, she thinks. Oh, the phone's rung. It's her best friend, Tabitha. They have a right old chinwag. Now she's hung up. Let's get back to it. It's rather late now, but Tallulah would really like to see the results of her labour today. She's had an idea. Although a table and chairs was what she planned, maybe this would make a very interesting set of shelves with a matching half table. That would be so cool. By 1 a.m, it's all finished, and Tallulah toddles off to bed. The next morning, her partner, Peter, isn't quite so sure about her inventive new design. Where is he going to sit to eat his breakfast? Now, Tallulah has an innovative problem-solving style. This means she isn't always conventional in her approach to things. Although Peter doesn't have anywhere to sit, they do now have somewhere to store her books, which was a problem before. Tallulah is great at solving problems which don't have an off-the-shelf solution. She finds life exciting, interesting and fun, although Claire thinks she's a bit risky. Tallulah thinks Claire should loosen up a little bit and enjoy being spontaneous once in a while. Despite their differences, they're good friends, but they just have a slightly different approach to life. What's your problem-solving style? Are you more like Claire or more like Tallulah, or perhaps somewhere in between? To find out more, do visit our website, www.
All right. Okay. Any questions or comments about the video? Can you all relate to knowing people like Claire and like Tallulah? So here's the thing is having like a standard operating procedure and a manual and this is how we do things, it helps everybody, but for different reasons. I think that thank you, Diego. I think that the more adaptive, they want to know that they're doing things right. And the more innovative, you kind of need some guardrails for them so that they, don't end up making a bookshelf out of a table and think that it was a good idea. I have a feeling that my husband would definitely say that I'm a Tallulah, based on some experiences we've had. It's always I thought you said we were doing this for dinner. No, that was just an idea. All right. So here's the thing is we're also talking about style of change. So I'm not sure everybody appreciates this, but I want you to sit with the idea that when you solve a problem, you are bringing about change. And so what does that mean? So we've got change that is better and change that is different. So there's different styles of change. Everybody likes change. They just prefer their own kind of change. So when you're more structured and you don't like to change a big piece of how things are being done, it's like you want to drive down the cost of operations. You want to drive up the efficiency. It's a lot of standard operating procedures. It's that continuous improvement feel. When you're talking about innovation, you're talking about doing things differently. It's like adopting a new system, finding unexpected markets or uses, new ways to make or save money, developing a new technology or a new system. But that's the idea. And so when you go about to work together or to collaborate or to solve a problem based on a person's problem solving style, they may be wondering, especially the more adaptive, like, all right, are we changing a lot? If we're changing a lot, what is that change? And the more innovative, especially if they've had, some life experience, they know if they're super innovative or a high innovator, as we say, they'll recognize that maybe not everybody wants that, all the change. So again, clarifying how much change do you want in this situation? How big is the change? So starting with, this is the desired outcome. Now let's figure out how to get there is the best way to manage not only your team, but if you're trying to manage up and your own boss says, oh, I need you to do X, ask questions like, well, what does success look like? What are the necessary, what are necessary constraints? What can I change? What do you want to see changed? What don't you want to see changed? So creating more and more, definition around what success looks like. That's really important in managing up. So again, going back to understanding creativity, remember we're talking about not how creative you are, but how you're creative. And when you have differences, there can be some friction. And all there is to do is to clarify what underlying assumptions there are. And again, I just can't emphasize this enough. Everybody is creative. They're just creative differently. So interestingly, the reason I've been talking about and the slides say more innovative and more adaptive is because really what we're talking about is where you are relatively speaking. So the guy on the slide there, his score is probably, I don't know, about 100, maybe 108. And his self-perception is like, oh, I'm kind of in the middle. I can talk to the people that are more structured. I can talk to the people who are less structured. But then if he hasn't moved, but if he's on a different team and everybody's more innovative, then he's the person that probably holds down the fort when it comes to those like very structured tasks, like taking notes and providing structure. And I would note that I think my perception is that when someone is the most adaptive and they're in a group that seems to be a little too freewheeling, it can be kind of unnerving. Like, what are we going to do? When are we going to get it done? And then by the same token, this same person could be the most innovative, again, depending on the team, based on the team that he's on. So the point here really is even if you never take the assessment, is to recognize that you are, to notice the people around you, notice your colleagues, your family members. Am I more or less structured than they are in approach? And then what does that mean for us working or living together? And so again, it's all relative, that the man is always more adaptive. The woman is always more innovative, even if she's all the way over there or he's, much further over. All right. So I'm curious here. Remember, problem A is the problem you go to work for. Problem B is the friction around potentially being, different problem solving style. Anybody have any examples of what that might be that are top of mind? So I can tell you my husband always likes things planned out. And we just got back from a vacation. So a lot more planning on his part as opposed to me just kind of like, all right, go with the flow. All I want to do is know when can I get my really long walk in, you know. Also, things like, so for the first time in like, I don't know, 10 years, we checked a bag because we're going to be gone for a while. And I wanted to take my weight vest for working out. So I had it in the check bag on the way back, and they weighed it, and it was 34 kilograms, which is 75 pounds. So I was over by two. So it's about this about 10 kilograms, or whatever. It's like 8, something like that, 5, 8, whatever it is. So, but my husband wanted it all planned out to make sure there'd be no problem. Whereas I kind of knew that, if we get there and there's a problem, I'll just take my weight vest out. So I actually wore my weight vest I took it off going through security, but I wore it getting on the plane, wore it through the airport coming home, because that's how I needed to do it. But I'm much more willing to leave enough to chance, or at least have a plan like, well, we'll see if it works. And if it doesn't, then I've got, plan B, C, or D. So that's something that can come up too when you're talking about different problem solving styles. Unfortunately, we didn't have any friction over that. Anybody else have any examples?
So I tend to be on the pretty adaptive side. And one of the executive members is much more innovative. And so when we are problem solving, I tend to maybe come off, because I'm so into the details and whether or not things are mechanically going to work. I know that I can come off as the no person. And I like, sometimes they come up with such crazy things that I'm like, why did you even say that? Because inherently it's not going to work, but they're just throwing anything out there. And I'm more the type to not throw anything out there unless I know that it's even like really logically possible. And that can cause, I think, some friction and frustration on both sides.
Yeah. So what you're talking about, like perfect segue into this, is the sub scores. So so obviously you saw everybody gets a number, every number is good, but it's not just sort of, oh, I'm more structured or less structured. It's, your problem solving style is made up of your approach to idea generation. So what Nicole just said about she doesn't throw out ideas unless she's pretty sure they're going to work is, again, like, look at that, more adaptive, fewer ideas, but you expect them to work. You expect a high success rate. Whereas the more innovative are going to have a lot of ideas. I mean, almost if they're really innovative and, had a couple drinks, maybe, like it's like a sport, like, let me see how many ideas that I can come up with, knowing, by the way, full well that and this is the thing, so hopefully, knowing full well that we're not even going to get anywhere with those ideas. We're not going to implement them. Or I've had my more innovative clients say about their more adaptive colleagues, oh yeah, like, if unless Nicole says it's going to work, we're not doing that. Or with like my friend Christy, oh, if Christy says it's okay, it's good, it's going out the door, that kind of thing. So my advice to you there is to wait until somebody really says, like, yeah, we want to implement this idea, because there's so many that are going to be discarded, right? And then what the other thing you said I think is really interesting, I'm going to come back to this slide, is like the implementation. Like, you've thought about, like, is this implementable? Is it even possible? And so the more adaptive, again, like more structured, paying attention to detail, and the more innovative, lots and lots of ideas, approaching problems from a different angle, which, by the way, can be the right approach. Like, you and I have been in problem solving sessions, and that, and I'll ask, like, could it be this? Could it be that instead? And that approach can be valuable. It might be wrong, but at least it gets you to question your underlying assumptions. so that you don't miss anything. So there's that piece of it, but I want to go back to this slide. So I love this slide because the more adaptive tend to look at situations and pick out all the pieces that don't work because they want it to work, whatever it is. The more innovative tend to look at the big picture and sort of be like, yeah, we're on the right track. That's amazing. And the example I give is that logo in the lower left-hand corner. Cynthia and I were rebranding the business about 2.5 years ago. We both look at it, and the first thing I say, being more innovative, is, "Oh, that's like, I love it. I think it's really great." And Cynthia's like, "I don't know. I think we might want to try a different font for the step into power, and I think the orange band is too thick." And I'm like, yeah, I actually agreed with her that we should look at that. But the first thing out of my mouth was positive. The first thing out of Cynthia's mouth was critical, right? So what I want you to take, and by the way, we coached somebody whose boss was like me, and he was, and the VP of HR was more adaptive, I think in 83. And he got himself in kind of a bad way with his CEO because she thought he wasn't supporting her and her programs because he was always sounding critical, and all he was trying to do was to make it work. So that's something for anybody who knows that they're more adaptive, like you, Nicole. Like, all right, I don't want to sound like I'm the wet blanket here. Like you just know that, right? It's like a little bit like I know, like, oh, I got to sound like I'm not the, like, crazy redhead with all these ideas. And I know that I have to temper it so I don't freak some of my clients out, right? So I'm always coping in terms of, being more structured, coming up with the timed agendas, which I hate doing. But if it's a totally new program, it actually is kind of helpful. Again, an example of when coping is good for you. So the managing up piece is recognizing this person is different than me, and how does my well-intentioned comments, how are they being perceived? Like just asking that question, right?
This
All
is
right.
Laverne. I agree. That's kind of like what I do. I have a partner who's we're like the opposite. I'm the innovative, she's the adaptive, and it's like she wants to strike out all the things, and I want to try to find ways to get things and everybody engaged and involved and listen and have people have some options, and then we work through it. But we complement one another. We've learned because we've been together a long time, and it has worked out better because she says, well, this is the way you are. Yes, I'm going to come with everything that's right, and she's going to come with whatever. And then we start just acting out the true things that count. But I want to get some action and movement. But when you have so much limits, then you don't have the option to get
Yeah.
choices.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the more innovative, I mean, we want to see movement. I mean, I recognize my own impatience in that, want to see something change, right? So, any other questions about this? All right, so I'm going to go now. I want to go to all right, actually I'll go through my little boats here. So I actually took this from one of our colleagues' podcasts. So he talks about, in the 1800s that the people came with sailing ships, brought goods to the US on sailing ships. And then some innovative engineer said, hey, you know what, we should do that. We should use, steamships. Well, the problem was the coal weighed so much that many of the steamships would capsize. So that wasn't good. So it wasn't until they started, an adaptive engineer got involved that they were able to take the innovative idea and implement it. And that just goes to say that most problems are what we call complex problems, meaning that you need all perspectives to make it work. there's, there's a ton of quotes out there that are kind of about, well, if you and I think the same, then, then why are we both in, in this workplace, right? Because you want to really value the different ideas. So the last part of your composite KAI is what's called rule group conformity. And so the idea, what it measures is the degree to which you feel the need to comply with rules and group norms. So people who don't feel the need to comply with rules, like if you're in, and I know Laverne, like you work in healthcare, Nicole, you work in behavioral health, like it can be incredibly stressful to work with colleagues who you think play fast and loose with the rules, right? And because you don't trust them, right? So this has to do with like trust that yep, you're gonna do things the way that I would do them, and that I appreciate. It doesn't mean that you have to be the same score or similar to trust the person, but so that's another way of looking at it. You don't have to have a problem B. Like, in other words, like I could be working in your environment. I'm really innovative. And it's like, oh yeah, all those rules. I totally appreciate them, and I'm going to do it the right way. So, so often giving people the why underneath it. Why is this important? How does this protect, the organization? How does it protect you as an individual from like malpractice or that sort of thing? So that's kind of like the rules, right? But the other piece of this, which I alluded to before, was the challenging or being prudent with authority, right? So, do you challenge authority, or are you more cautious with authority? And people who are more adaptive are less likely to challenge their boss. It can be very uncomfortable and it can feel very unsafe, right? And then the people who are more innovative can actually get themselves in a little bit of trouble by not recognizing that maybe they should hold back a little bit. So if I go back to, I just want to go back to kind of the each of these. When we go back to idea generation, so we're talking about this affects communication. Are we communicating at the same level? Or do I feel like, you're speaking to me in French and it's too fast and I don't get it, or you're not focusing on the same things, right? So communication. And it's not that you can't flex or cope to communicate well, but you have to know that you've got to do that, or and this helps you to see when you do. This is about this method of operation. This subscore is really about, do we work together well, right? So do we pay attention to the same level of detail? Do we problem solve do we implement solutions pretty simply or pretty similarly? And then lastly, what we have here, the rule group conformity that we just went over is again about that trust. Now, with all these different problem solving styles and people seeing things different, seeing the world differently, and there being diversity, you want to remind yourself to be curious, just like my little Greta there, and use coaching skills. So this is many of you have the workbook. This is a problem solving model. What's the problem we want to solve? Step 5 is, and 1 are the bookends. Step 5 is, what did we solve? What did we agree to? By the way, trick for everybody running a meeting is that you should all go around the room and say what everybody's going to do by when. It's an adaptive technique that makes sure that you're on the same page. So when Liz was talking about, making sure that everything was written down, again, like very much consistent with using coaching. But the coaching piece that I want to focus on really right now is that messy brainstorming, creating the action plan, identifying resource needs, and removing obstacles. You want to ask your team members, what open-ended questions that follow that model so that you can support them in having insights in problem solving. Because, most problems you solve are complex, meaning that you need people from all across the KAI continuum to give their input. And then to remember that, different styles doesn't equal lack of ability, and to focus on what you appreciate in different problem solving styles. So I know many of you have done our Leadership Academy, but if you haven't and you're interested, or if you know somebody who is interested, there's a QR code, and actually there's a code 30-off, or if you forget, you can always email us. But our next core training starts October 9th.